We saw you, Douglas Dell, and Jeff Bezos when you were greeting Jason Rezaian when he arrived in Germany. How did you feel, and what did you feel when you saw your reporter free, finally, and safe? And can I ask what you talked about?
Well, it was an exceptionally emotional moment. It was something that we had been hoping for 545 days. We had an extreme consciousness of what he had gone through, a real feel for that. And we didn't know how long he was going to be there. So just seeing him in the flesh, seeing him as a free man, seeing him in the hospital, we just hugged him, said how happy we were to see him, and then we talked. We just talked for 2 hours. We let him talk about whatever he wanted to talk about, talk a little bit about his conditions, talk a bit about how he was just feeling about the torturous last day, trying to get out of Iran, to get the plane to take off, and to find his wife and his mother. So there were a lot of things to talk about, but for the most part, we didn't interview him, we just let him talk.
Of course, how is he holding up now? How is he doing? And as I mentioned before, we do have seen some pictures of him in the editorial meetings here in the building of the Post. And are you going to give him some time, or you're just going to give him writing assignments right away?
Oh, well, we're going to give him a lot of time. I think physically he's doing fine. You know, when you're in prison for 545 days, 49 days of those in solitary confinement, it's something that you have to get over. It's something, he's trying to reclaim his life right now and get a sense of what it's like to be a free man again, reintroduce himself to his wife. They were married only for a year before they were both sent to prison, and then she was later released. So they just want to spend time with each other. I think he doesn't want to be in a position, and should not be in a position, of being bombarded with questions and being bombarded with decisions and things like that. So right now he's sort of begun the process to think about what he wants to do next. We've embarked on some conversations with him about that, and we'll see where that leads.
We could see that he was also very emotional yesterday when he was talking. You mentioned 545 days where Jason was in prison, and you weighed every single word you were saying during that time about the Iranian regime, because you knew how difficult, sensitive, and dangerous the situation was, and some even say that Jason was sort of a hostage inside Iran. Now that he's free, are you planning, are you thinking about going after those people in Iran who really played with the lives, dangerous games with the lives of innocent people?
Well, I don't know how we would go after anybody. It's impossible for us to do that, and that's not our role. Our role was to see that our correspondent there was released because he had done nothing wrong. And that's what we ultimately achieved. It took longer than we had hoped, of course, but now he's a free man, and we'll just have to move on.
In one of your interviews, you said that the captors in Iran, when Jason was in prison, they wanted to, when they wanted to put pressure on him, they would play games with his mind. Do you consider this a form of torture? Or could one consider this as a form of torture?
Well, I think it's I don't know, there's a legal definition of torture, an international legal definition of torture, and I don't want to get into that. I do consider it an injustice. Nobody should have their freedom taken away from them. Nobody should be taken away from his wife, from his mother, from his brother, from his entire family, taken away from his colleagues, denied his freedom. The threshold is not whether somebody was tortured. The threshold is whether somebody had his freedom or her freedom denied, and that was the case with Jason.
Have you learned anything from the things that you might not have known about the Iranian regime because of this case? Any new glimpse of the inner workings of the Iranian regime?
Well, I don't know how insightful those observations are. Certainly there are clearly factions within the country that are competing with each other. And that, I think, was put into fairly sharp relief in Jason's case. And it wasn't clear at all that the president was able to get him out immediately if he had wanted to, or that the foreign minister could. Obviously, the IRGC was in control. He was in a revolutionary, he was in a prison controlled by the Revolutionary Guard. He was tried in a revolutionary court. He was under the control of the Revolutionary Guard, including up to the last day until he was turned over to the Ministry of Intelligence.
In hindsight, do you think that the U.S. government could have done anything different or something more to expedite the release of Jason from prison? I know that you've said that you were not part of the negotiation, but as a close observer, you must have some kind of thoughts on this particular issue.
Well, my thought is that I don't really know because we were not there. We were not observing. Mm-hmm. The administration told us all along that it was doing everything it could, that it was having discussions alongside the nuclear talks, and then it intensified those discussions after the nuclear talks. And we do know that they were working seriously on this case for a very long period of time. The nuclear talks appeared to be the immediate priority, and then they were dealing with Jason's case and the cases of the other prisoners as well. I'm not in a position to judge whether they did enough, whether they could have done more, whether anything else they had done would have made any difference whatsoever. I'm grateful for the efforts that they made. Ultimately, they achieved Jason's release. Mm-hmm.
Has this case in any shape or form, is this going to affect your future coverage of Iran? And you mentioned another prisoner, and I would like to quote something from him, if I may. He was released at the same time with the swap with Jason, Matthew Trevitik. He described Iran as a nation that is at war with itself. And he said foreigners can get pulled into this internal war and become, as he said, pawns in a three-dimensional chess that's occurring inside Iran. Any plans to do more investigative journalism about inside Iran, what's going on? And I want to go back to the beginning of my question. Is this case going to change the coverage that you do at the Post on what's happening inside Iran?
Well, it changed it in a fundamental way. We used to have a correspondent who was situated in Iran who covered it very closely. We now don't have that. That's not our fault. That's the fault of the Iranian government and the Revolutionary Guard for having him arrested in the first place. So right now we're in a position where we don't have a correspondent in Iran. Of course, this is a story that we would love to cover closely. We would love to cover on the scene as we cover every other story. But right now we're not in a position to be able to put a correspondent there. We've had no discussions with the Iranian government about having another correspondent there, and we would need some good assurances from the government that a correspondent there would not be arrested as Jason was.
Have you introduced any new recommendations for the staff here or for anyone, any reporter who goes into any risky situations, places like Iran?
Well, we've always talked to our correspondents about precautions they need to take in risky circumstances. People go into different kinds of situations. So some people are going into war zones, some people are going into areas of quite a bit of conflict. Iran is its own case. Of course, we never expected that someone like Jason would be picked up and put in prison, put into solitary confinement, and then held for 18 months in prison. It was a complete surprise to us. And it remains a surprise to us that that happened, given that he didn't do anything wrong. So we will have to wait and see. We'll have to take our time, and obviously we'll try to cover the Iran story as closely as we can, but we're going to have to do that for now from outside the country, not within the country.
Of course. On the day Jason was freed, I'd like to read a tweet, if I may, from Jeff Bezos, and he wrote, "Believe me, if you're ever tossed in a foreign prison, you want Fred Ryan and Marty Baron on the team working to get you out of there." So you had a very unique experience during this time. Have you thought of putting these thoughts on paper, maybe to help other U.S. newspapers or editors worldwide, to get their maybe reporters out of dictatorial regimes' prisons?
Right. I have not thought about that because I don't consider myself to be an expert on this subject. First of all, the effort here was a big team effort. It included Fred Ryan, our publisher, is deeply involved in this. Of course, included myself, included our foreign editor, Doug Gell, our legal team, our public relations team, outside counsel. So it was a lot of people who were working on this. But our evaluation of the circumstances and what we should do changed over time because the things that we had tried to do at the beginning, which was initially to keep it fairly quiet, be very diplomatic, and hope that that the Iranians would see that they had made a mistake and have Jason released. We hoped that that would work. It did not work. And then we ramped up the rhetoric about it because it was entirely justified. So I don't consider myself an expert on this subject. There are probably far better experts than I am.
But it was a unique experience.
It was a unique experience, but I think that probably these kinds of situations will have to be evaluated individually.